we're living in this place where everyone is trying to biohack their health and be very innovative. But what we really need to do is take it back to the essentials of clean eating, clean living, and community.
Hi, this is Conversations with Intent. I am your host, Diana Clark, and today's guest is Dr. Raghu Appasani. He is both a practicing psychiatrist, great thinker, podcast performer, and even more than that, a colleague of mine that I've known for a few years and have been amazed at the direction his practice takes in integrative and addiction psychiatry. So I'm excited to welcome Dr. Raghu Appasani. So glad you're here with us. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well.
So you are both a thinker and a doctor. What you think about leads to what you practice in terms of medicine. But tell me, what got you interested in the field of mental health? What was the impetus for that direction?
Yeah, well, there's a quote that comes to mind by Eleanor Roosevelt, actually, which is, if it's not challenging, I'm not interested. And for me, growing up, I was always fascinated by the human experience. I grew up, in between sort of the American and the Indian cultures. My parents had immigrated when my older brother was 4, and then I was born, a few years after that, from India to Boston. And so just really trying to understand that integration of culture growing up in a suburban town of Boston got me first fascinated with, how do people experience life and how do they interact with each other? My dad is a biochemist by training, so he got me working in the lab quite early. So I was doing research at Harvard Med School and Children's Hospital starting in like freshman year of high school. And so I had that opportunity to just dive into the sciences. But what really started to come to surface for me was when I started to take philosophy of science classes and philosophy of mind courses in university at Wesleyan. And I was just becoming very fascinated with different states of consciousness and how they impact the way that we behave and the ways that we interact with another and treat each other. And coming back to that quote, the mind and the soul and the spirit for me were a mystery and was sort of this endeavor into an area where there was so much unknown. And I think that's what really attracted me to it when it first started. And then I continued to, almost like a marriage or a relationship, I continue to fall in love with the new elements of mental health and healthcare that face me every single day.
Because it seems to me, as a non-psychiatrist, but as somebody who enjoys reading about it, the field is changing every single day. Every single day. What was considered a given 30 years ago is not a given. What was considered, good practice 10 years ago may or may not be considered good practice today. How do you navigate the huge slipstream of this subject and stay current?
It's very challenging for sure. We have an influx of information. And, at the same time, our patients have an influx and clients and families have an influx of information that they're getting from the internet or from social media or, TikTok or whatever it is. And so not only, as a clinician, do I have to keep up with what's happening on the research side and the evidence-based medicine side, but, we have a responsibility to keep up with what is going on in the public sector, right? And what's going on and sort of what are our families hearing? What are they hearing about mental health? Like on the one hand, we don't have as much stigma about mental health and addiction and behavioral health these days. It's still there, but at least people are starting to talk about it. But on the other hand, it's leading to a lot of folks who might not be qualified talking about and putting information out there as well. And so we have to balance both things. For me, I do some of the practical things, like I keep up with the conferences and et cetera. But what I find to be the most helpful is staying engaged, not only by going to, clinical seminars and conferences, but the broader sector. So I'm very interested in overall medicine and lifestyle medicine and integrative health as well, and how that plays into the mix. And with that, for myself and my own mental health, mindfulness practices and meditation and nutrition have been instrumental in how I feel and behave and function. And so um, we can't just stay siloed and saying, hey, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm going to go to a psychiatric conference or read American Journal of Psychiatry. We have to stay very broad, and we learn so much by being open to these avenues. For example, I love going to art museums and looking at architecture, and that actually opens your mind up to a lot of creativity. And you might think of a different way of approaching a certain case with a family or an individual. And actually, in Europe now, physicians can prescribe visits to art museums, right? And so there's a benefit to allowing yourself as a practitioner, a moment to take a step back and tap into your creativity. So that's how I keep up with it. There's a practical side, but you got to constantly be pushing yourself to broaden your interests. And when you have those interests, you're also able to connect more deeply with your patients as well.
So, speaking of connecting with your patients, you explain a real intellectual curiosity for the subject, an enthusiasm for the subject. Do you have a personal story that fuels that enthusiasm?
Yeah, so there's two. I think one is that I've always loved psychiatry and neuroscience, and in medical school, I left my psychiatry rotation to almost the end of my clinical rotations because I wanted to stay open to everything else. And I also fell in love with plastic surgery, and apparently, this is not an uncommon thing between psychiatrists and plastic surgeons. So I loved the diligence of it and the creativeness and the design, but I also loved working with patients and having those conversations when they've been, either gone through an accident or a burn, and looking at how do you rehabilitate, how do you come back into your sense of self. Um, and I loved it, and I was almost about to pursue that as well. But then I really reconnected back to psychiatry on my rotation. I was able to work with an individual in the inpatient psychiatric unit who had a family back in India, and they only spoke actually the language that my family speaks in India. And so being able to be the medical student and the bridge to help when there was so much stigma in his family back home to not understand what was going on, that really brought it back for me as well. And to know that we have medications, but what it really comes down to is this ability to share a space with somebody and create a space that they can feel vulnerable. And it was in that moment I realized this is a privilege to be able to be a part of someone's story, whether it's a page or a chapter in their life. And unlike other places in medicine, it's still a field in which you have to be with the person and really be in that space. Um, and that, I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit later, is how do we define the space, which is something that I've thought a lot about and tried to transform from what I've been trained in. And then I think for me personally, I've dealt with my own amount of anxiety that has probably led to what we would say high functioning anxiety and trying to achieve. But it's something that I've had to work on myself through therapy and through these other practices I mentioned. And, during COVID, it got to a place where I had gotten quite depressed, and I was working a lot as a resident, and I had suicidal thoughts, and it got quite bad for a period of time. But I was able to lean on my community and get through that. And I use that, not to say, hey, oh my gosh, like I dealt with this, but to say, I got to experience that moment, something that some of my patients experience chronically. Um, and so to be there and to understand that has allowed me to connect even deeper on some levels with many of the folks that I work with.
How did you come out of your depressive episode?
I think for me, I lean on community a lot, and I have I have actually a lot, but some really critical and close people in my life where we constantly check in on each other. And that's what I was able to have is, picking up the phone and having them show up.
So
And just,
that's so counterculture to what I'm reading about the way young adults in particular are operating right now. They are not picking up phones. They are not going face to face. They might be texting, they may be screen sharing, but that sharing space. So let's talk about what consists of sharing space where there is a psychiatric or psychological benefit. What does that space have to be?
yeah. And so, I trained in the traditional system, and what that means is we would have therapy sessions in an office, or we would do medication management appointments that were, you know, short, 15, 20 minutes. And I just don't think that's enough. And what you're trying to get the essence of someone, right? The sense of self. How are they really doing? There's a benefit to having a therapist's office and a psychiatrist clinical office for sure. And there's a number of patients I see in my office. However, I also work with a lot of folks who have not had great experiences with not just mental health, but the healthcare system in general. Whether it's young adults who've been sent away multiple times for treatment as teens and have been experienced trauma through that or bad experiences through that, or folks who've not connected well with the therapist or have been over medicated or put on the wrong meds and have side effects, and there's hesitation. When it comes to treating somebody for mental health, you have to think about the whole person, and that's also what setting are they in, right? And if they come into your office, there's a tendency to want to present in a certain way. And so there's many individuals where I meet them where they're at, which means physically at their home. And through observation alone, you can see how they're living. Is it messy? Is it organized? Are they keeping it clean? What's in their pantry? And can you go through that with them and see what they're eating, right? And see what nutrition they're eating. And with that, I'm able to even take some patients with me to the farmer's market and start to teach them, hey, like your mood would improve if you just threw a couple of servings of fish in a week, or,
Right?
and
Or have
really
a
trying to,
vegetable. Yeah.
yeah. And it's not just, there's no magical pill that's going to solve this. It might help you as a bridge, but what are we doing here to do habit change to really uplift your life? And so I'll meet patients at their home, I'll meet with their families. Sometimes I go on a hike with them as well. The idea of moving as you're talking can alleviate a level of anxiety to feel comfort and actually start to open up a little bit more. And so we
So
have
that
to
is
start to think.
consistent with our coaches, what they do, and they do field work by and large. They're out there, they're applying for jobs with their clients, they are shopping, they're buying clothes, whatever that might be. And there is a connection in doing a joint task in and of itself, regardless of what you're talking about. You don't have to be talking about something intimate if you have a shared goal. And I think that is the connection in that moment. That's amazing that you, as a psychiatrist, are actually making what we used to call house calls.
Exactly. Yeah. It's literally house calls. And, I got my little stethoscope and my tools, and I'm doing medical care as well, right? I think that what I've recognized is that I end up becoming probably the most trusted healthcare professional in that individual's life. And so I'm also able to then advocate for them to see other specialists or do some basic, primary care work that they need work on. And that's what it's about is someone is inviting you into their life and opening up with the most intimate and vulnerable things about them and what they're experiencing. And so, it's a lot of responsibility, but it's a privilege to then be able to help advocate for them and get them to a place where they can start to advocate for themselves. Um, and that's really cool, right? And I love working with especially those in their like 20s who didn't really get that when they were younger.
And your population, the people that you predominantly see, are younger and have capacity for radical shifts. You get to be part of those radical shifts. That's exciting work.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I do work with, I would say anyone from the age of 13, 14, and up. My oldest is about 77, but a lot of youthful energy. And so I work with a lot of young adults who've often been misdiagnosed, dealing with substance use, and have had the finger pointed at them for being, quote, an addict, without people understanding that, hey, there was shame about a trauma, and that led to the use of a substance to try to numb that shame. And now there's shame about the use, and they're stuck in this cycle.
So let's, if we ascribe to the notion that all substance use disorders are a way of medicating or numbing pain, I'm not sure I buy that, but I believe the large bulk are. But even if they're not, even if it was Joe Schmo who happened to like beer at a kegger in the 8th grade and his brain said, love this, want to keep trying it. And every time he did it, his brain changed a little bit more. And every time he tried it, it answered some different need for him. So his brain changed. Why does that deserve less empathy than anything else that we encounter in life?
Exactly, 100%. And that's why when someone calls me and says, this loved one in my family is struggling with this addiction, I'll meet with them, but the whole family needs to commit to doing the work. And that means they need to stop pointing the finger and think about, why did this person end up in this situation? Like, what is it throughout our family history or the context, or what is going on here? How do we actually stop pointing the finger at them and start to heal as a family system now? And even, okay, your example, right? Like, this person might not have had a significant trauma that you can point to, but even when they started drinking, maybe they had a genetic predisposition to it. That drinking alone has probably then led to poor decisions and other outcomes that might have been traumatizing, et cetera. And there something does happen. And so there's that. But I also work with a lot of executives, founders, and a lot of creatives and musicians, and absolutely love doing that as well. And it's really about starting to integrate mind, body, spirit. So, and looking at underlying issues. And especially for those who are young in their 20s, it's not just a trauma that might have led to that, but it also is, there's been a rise in a lot of autoimmune conditions. And there's been a rise, or there's been almost a blind eye, or maybe just not a knowledge base about other conditions like Ehlers-Danlos or Pott's disease, and some of these more very complex multi-symptom issues that people face. And because of the distress from it at times, and the impact on day-to-day living, people will turn to substances as a way to find relief, because oftentimes they're kind of pushed aside by the healthcare system and misdiagnosed. And so I also see a lot of that happening. And I just have found a true passion for getting down to what's the core. Is there a hormonal issue? Is there an autoimmune issue? How do we change your diet to try to fit this? And really pulling in the right people to do so.
So I've known people who have been long-term sufferers of autoimmune disorders, whether they are, in bed or out of bed, but in general, the debilitating limitations on their lives have been profound. And I'm wondering, how do you tease apart the profound depression that can be developed as a result of having a limited life, or whether it was actually one of the origin symptoms? How do you tease those things apart?
It's challenging, and as we're teasing it out, it's still important to treat the depression, right? Like, we're not putting that aside, but I do very specialized lab testing as well, and I really try to sit with them and create a timeline of their life and their symptoms and what's going on. And if I have to bring in specialists, I'll bring in specialists. And then we try different things, right? There's certain diets that have been proven to help alleviate some of those symptoms. Like Dr. Dean Ornish, for example, right? One of the kind of fathers, I would say, of lifestyle medicine. I mean, he has created a whole lifestyle diet that reverses cardiovascular disease and more recently Alzheimer's symptoms. Um, and there's strong data around this, and they're reimbursed by Medicare right now. And so
And what kind of foods does that diet include?
clean plant-based foods primarily, along with some light stretching and yoga and meditation, right? It's we're living in this place where everyone is trying to biohack their health and be very innovative. But what we really need to do is take it back to the essentials of clean eating, clean living, and community. We
I
right
read a study recently that, just without community, you can have clean living, you can exercise, you're still not going to be as healthy as you would if you had connection in your life. That the
exactly.
single most important facet for longevity was connection.
Exactly. And there was actually a research done through the Future Food Institute in Naples, in Italy, where they showed that eating with others at the table versus eating alone releases a whole different set of enzymes. You metabolize your food better, it helps you slow down, you have more oxytocin release, less cortisol, so less stress. That's the stuff that it's about, right? And
Do
so
you think that's what accounts for the blue zones? In each one of
well,
those
those are
blue
very
zones,
controversial now,
I
but
know, but they're more community food
yep,
based.
100%. I think so. And when you take the time to go to the market to cook, the intentionality around what you're eating and your food, that is very different than living in an urban world of DoorDash and Uber Eats,
Watching
right?
TV while you eat.
Mhm. And so for me, my practice is talking about all of these with my patients, right? I obviously, I'm doing the detox, I'm doing the pharmacological side when it's necessary, but it's not just about that. It's about what's our actual goal here with you, right? And to be a part of that narrative of helping someone not just think about their goals, but actually envision it and to find some truth that it can come to reality. Like I think that's where the magic happens. We're not curing or healing anyone, but we're opening the door and providing a little bit of a catalyst and support to get through it.
For them to heal themselves.
Exactly.
Open up that door. Yeah.
Exactly. And because of that too, part of my model is to try to make myself as available as possible. And so families and patients can text and call me, and I usually respond relatively quickly or within a
Good.
day or so at
You
least.
are you are very responsive. Yeah. So when you describe the term concierge psychiatry, that is what you're talking about, readily being available, doing potentially house calls, looking at it from a systemic effort. Do you ever have individuals that you're treating who are reluctant to sign the waivers so that you can work with their families?
Yes, and it doesn't always make sense to work with the families. Sometimes it's individual, and I've had folks also. It wasn't with families. They like to bring in a close friend, and so we define family quite broadly as well of what that entails. But um, and there's a few folks where it's a little more traditional. They're individual, and we're doing one-on-one psychotherapy work and somatic therapy work. But I will say that every single client and patient I have currently, there is at least one family member or friend involved.
So nobody gets well alone.
Nobody gets well alone. We're not meant to as
We're
a
not meant
as a
to.
human.
Yeah, I
Um,
like that.
we think about what happens with like urbanization, industrialization, right, and individualization. It's there's a lot of issues coming up.
I know. I know. And we're hearing about adolescent depression and isolation. We're hearing about young adults who, between the ages of 18 and 30, have never had a sexual relationship or a lover. We're hearing greater percentages of people who have no sense of connection and community.
Exactly, and that's happening, and then we have the opposite side of the spectrum as the older generation is starting to feel alone, isolated, and as a country, we need to do a better job of taking care of them as well. And imagine a place where we could set up mentorship between that generation and the younger generation. Everyone thrives, right? So as I think for me, just I try to imagine a place in which the family system can come back together and the communities can come back together, and we actually start to engage again with one another. And I think that's where the healing will happen. And we won't be so living in a society full of so much cortisol.
Right. So what gives you hope? We see what's happening. What gives you hope?
Honestly, the patients I work with, they give me a lot of hope on a daily basis. It's a very difficult it's a very difficult practice, I will say, but I learn so much from them on a day-to-day basis. And I think what gives me hope is their commitment to get better, their motivation to get better, and seeing them get better and going off and changing the world, right? When you see someone who is suffering with their debilitating trauma and significant substance use get into their top choice college and go off and then start a company to impact the world. I mean, things like that, right, are amazing. Or just like graduate high school, or have a
Make a
successful
friend
marriage, make a
or make a
friend.
friend
Yeah.
or get
Or
a
they
job.
they went
Yeah.
out to the first social event in years. I think that it's those little moments that are really amazing. And that it gives me a lot of hope in that sense. I also do think that, there's a number of young people who really want to change the world and the dynamic. And when I come across them, it's phenomenal. And we're getting there. There's been a movement, I will also say, of starting to take care of ourselves a bit more in terms of our health. And it has its pros and cons, but generally it's something that I love seeing, and that people are starting to be a bit more intentional about it. So yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Well, I'm excited to hear what happens next in your journey and the quest for both compassionate care. I hope you take care of yourself during all this. It does sound like a lot.
I am. I have my practices. I'm actually going off to see my therapist later today, because we have to also practice what we preach. And, I don't know if you know this, Diana, but like, if I wasn't doing this, my dream job would to be a chef and create meals for communities. And so, yeah, I love cooking. And so I try to practice a lot of the things that I'm putting out there as well. So that's kind of how I take care of myself.
I love that. Well, my passion is baking. So you
Ah,
do the food, I'll do the dessert. How's that?
perfect.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Appasani. It's great to have talked with you today. For you listeners, if you like this episode, please like us on your platform of choice. Or if you have questions for either Dr. Raghu Appasani or myself, email us at conversations@intentclinical.com.